Hello and welcome to StudyIQ. In this lecture, we will discuss about the background of LPG policy, that is liberalization, privatization and globalization in India, and we will discuss about the immediate after effects of the liberalization, privatization and globalization. So let us start. LPG and appraisal. In 1991, India met with an economic crisis related to external debt. So this was in the year 1991. India was not able to make repayments for its borrowings from abroad. So India was not able to make the repayments on the borrowings from abroad, and as a result the forex of the country dropped. So forex reserves dropped, and as a result of decrease in forex reserves, the price of essential commodities increased. So essential goods, the prices increased, and this led to huge inflation in the country and also a shortage of forex reserves. Let us see what was the background of this crisis. Background. If we look at the background of this crisis, we can divide the causes into two reasons. Mainly, one is internal factors and second one external factors. So both internal as well as external factors were responsible for this BOP crisis or balance of payment crisis in the country. First, let us see what were the internal causes. First of all, the expenditure of the government was more than the revenue. That means expenditure was more than the revenue of the government. This will lead to deficit or fiscal deficit. So as a result, what will happen? When fiscal deficit increases, the government borrowings also increases. So, in order to meet the expenditures, the government will borrow money from various sources, and this can be from abroad also. So, when government borrows money from abroad, you should understand that government will have to repay the amount along with the interest in terms of dollars, which is forex. So, government will need adequate forex reserves in order to make the repayments. So this was one reason. Increased expenditure of the government led to borrowings from abroad, and this had to be paid in terms of forex. This was one reason for decrease in forex reserves of the country. And what were the reasons for this increased expenditure of the government? This increased expenditure was due to various reasons, like the developmental policies of the government. When we learn about the 5-year plans in India, we will in detail see what were the developmental policies of the government during that time. But in short, the government had various developmental policies and programs during this time, and because of those policies, the expenditure were always more than the revenue of the government. Another reason was that government had given priority to the social sector as well as defense. The third reason was that the government did not earn sufficiently from taxation and PSUs. The rate of taxation during that time was high, and due to the increased rate of taxation, what the general public did was many people evaded tax. So tax evasion was very common because of the higher rates of taxation, and this has led to decreased tax collection. So the revenue from taxation was less for the government. Also, PSUs, they also did not earn sufficiently. What was the reason PSUs did not earn sufficiently? PSUs did not earn sufficiently because of inefficiency. What was the causes for inefficiency? During that time, PSUs were under the political control. So PSUs were completely owned by the government, and this was obviously under the political control. So as the PSUs were under the direct control of the government, there were a lot of red tapeism, because they had to get the permission from the government to implement anything. So any minor change also required the permission of the government, and there was increased red tapeism. Also the political pressure was so high, or political influence was high. So these were all reasons for inefficiency in the PSUs, which led to insufficient revenue collection from the PSUs. So because of all these reasons, government had to borrow money in order to meet the expenditure of the government. So even at times government had to borrow for consumption expenditure also. So this led to huge borrowings, which led to increased So borrowings had to be paid back in terms of forex, and this led to shortage of forex in the economy. So these were the internal factors. Coming to the external factors, there are mainly two external factors. One was the Gulf War. So during the Gulf War, the prices of the oil shoot up. So increased price of oil increased the import expenditure of the government. We were highly dependent on imports for our oil requirements, so import expenditure also increased. So import also has to be paid in terms of dollar. So this was also another issue. So increase in the prices of oil led to increased expenditure on government imports, and this also led to shortage in forex reserves. Another reason was the disintegration of USSR. So what happened was USSR disintegrated, and what we had signed a counter trade agreement with USSR. India had a counter trade agreement with USSR. So according to this agreement, the counter trade agreement, USSR and India had agreed that if suppose India exports $1,000 commodities from USSR, USSR would import the same $1,000 commodities from India. That means there was no need of forex, or money was not required. So according to the counter trade agreement, USSR agreed to buy the same quantity of commodities or the same amount of commodities which India would import from USSR. So if India is importing some amount of commodities from USSR, the USSR would buy or import from India the same the USSR would import from India for the same amount. So this was the counter trade agreement, and with the disintegration of USSR, the counter trade agreement became invalid. So now what India had to do? India had to pay in order to import from USSR. So India's import expenditure again increased, because now India has to pay to the different blocks of USSR if import has to take place. So CTA or the counter trade agreement became invalid. So these were the factors that culminated into the shortage of forex in the country. So India ran short of forex, and India was not even able to pay back the borrowings or the interest. So what India did? India approached the World Bank and the IMF. So the only solution left with India was to approach the World Bank and IMF. And India asked for 7 billion as loan. So India asked for their aid, and the amount was $7 billion. World Bank and the IMF agreed that they will give this loan to India, but on one condition. What was the condition? The condition was to liberalize and open up the economy. So what does this liberalize and open up the economy mean? Let us see. Firstly, it meant that it should reduce the role of government. Remove restrictions on private sector. Remove restrictions on private sector, and also remove trade restrictions between India and other countries. So what does this mean? Reduce the role of government. It means that now government cannot control everything. Government should just be a facilitator. It will not have the autonomy to control everything. So government should reduce its role to a facilitator. Remove restrictions of private sector. It means that privatization should take place, or private sector should be allowed to function in the economy. So private sectors should be given more autonomy and freedom in order to establish institutions in the economy. Remove trade restrictions between India and other countries. It means that tariffs on trade should come down. So trade tariffs should come down, and this should ensure free flow of goods and services from India to other countries and from other countries to India as well. So this was the condition given by the World Bank and the IMF. And in order to comply with these conditions, India announced the NEP, or the New Economic Policy. So what is NEP? NEP is a set of policies, and broadly we can divide NEP into two. One is stabilization policies and the other one is structural reform policies. So let us see stabilization, and secondly structural reform policies. Now let us see stabilization policies. So you must understand here that stabilization policies are short-term policies. What does the term stabilization means? stabilize, to correct, to rectify, to bring it back to the original position. So the aim of the stabilization policies were to bring back the economy to normal. So it was just to stabilize, to bring back economy into the normal situation. So the aim of the stabilization policies were to correct some of the weaknesses that had arisen during the BOP crisis. So to correct the weaknesses, as we said, to stabilize the economy or to bring back the economy to normal. So what are the weaknesses that arose during the BOP crisis? First one, we said increase in the prices of essential goods and other commodities, which is known as inflation. Inflation means the persistent rise in the prices of commodities in the market. So we said that during this crisis the prices had shoot up in the market, and this led to higher rates of inflation in the economy. And secondly, we said that we had a huge shortage of forex reserves. So second weakness was shortage of forex. So the aim of stabilization policies were to rectify these two mistakes, that is inflation control and shortage of forex. These two should be regulated. So this was the aim or purpose of the stabilization policy. So coming to the structural reform policies, let us see what is structural reform policies. They were long-term policies. They were aimed at making a long-term impact on the economy. For example, investments from abroad, that is FDI, FII, etc. FDI will have a very long-term impact in the economy. So such policies were under the structural reform policies. So the aim of this structural reform policies were to improve the efficiency of the economy and to increase the competition or competitiveness of the economy. Efficiency and competitiveness. So you know, efficiency and competitiveness can be achieved in a long term or long run. So these was the objective of structural reform policies. Now let us see LPG in detail. Liberalisation, privatisation and globalisation. First, let us make an analysis of the liberalisation. Liberalization means opening up of various sectors of the economy. So liberalizing. So by liberalizing, various sectors are open to the private sector as well as to the foreign. So private and foreign. So now policies are liberal or rules are liberal. So now let us see what does liberalization meant for various sectors. First of all, the industrial sector. Earlier, industrial sector was regulated through licensing. So this was before the liberalization. It was regulated through the licensing system. Private sector was not allowed in many sectors. So private were not allowed to make investment in various sectors under the industry. Also, many sectors under the industry was reserved for small scale industries. So reservations were there. Also, the government had control over price and distribution of various commodities. Price and distribution. What does it mean? It means that the price of certain commodities were decided by the government. So, at what value it should be sold in the market. So, such things were decided by the government. And distribution means quantity of the commodities. How much of commodities or what quantity of commodities should be sold in the market. All this were decided by the government. So there were licensing. Also private sector was not allowed to make investment in certain areas. Also reservations for small scale industries were also made. Also the price and distribution was decided by the government. Market had no role in price and distribution. Actually, ideally, market should decide. The demand and supply forces should decide. But here, the government decided the price and also the quantity of distribution. So, this was the condition before liberalization. So, now let us see what happened after liberalization. After liberalization, industrial licensing was abolished and it was kept for only few industries. So, industrial licensing abolished. Except a few industries, industrial licensing was not required. Before liberalization, we said that private sectors were restricted to make investment in certain areas. But after liberalization, what happened was private sector was given the choice and freedom of investing in almost all the areas except a few areas or few industries. So, private sector were private sector was given the freedom to invest in different sectors in the economy, and only a few sectors were reserved for the public sector or the government, and these were the railways, defense, etc. So exceptions were railway, atomic energy, defense, etc. We also said that there were reservations before liberalization, means reservation for small scale industries. So after liberalization, what the government did was dereservations. So it meant that the reservations were taken away. So now anybody can invest. The most important one was that market was allowed to determine the price and distribution. How does the market determine price and distribution? Based on demand and supply forces. So according to the demand and supply, the market can automatically decide the price of commodities and also the amount of distribution, or what quantity should be distributed in the market. So this was decided by the market. Now let us come to the financial sector. The financial sector of the economy includes commercial banks, investment banks, stock exchanges, foreign exchanges, etc. So before the liberalization, RBI was the regulator of the financial institutions in the country. RBI was the regulator. You should remember, this is regulator, not facilitator. So what happened after liberalization was that the role of the RBI decreased from that of regulator to facilitator. So what is the difference between regulator and facilitator? Regulator means that the person or the institution which regulates or controls everything. So before liberalization, RBI controlled everything or the financial sector. But when it became a facilitator, it means that RBI is now responsible to make policies and programs which will facilitate or which will help in transactions, but not control. It is not completely controlled by the RBI. So it became a facilitator. Another change that was seen in the financial sector was that new private banks as well as foreign banks were allowed to invest in the country. So this led to the arrival of private and foreign banks. New private and foreign banks were set up in the country. And later on, the government appointed the Bimal Jalan Committee also. That was recently the Bimal Jalan Committee, which was responsible for setting up of criteria for establishment of private banks and foreign banks in the country. And Bimal Jalan Committee is a very important committee which we will discuss when we discuss the banking module. So this committee name you should remember, and this committee is responsible for giving the criteria of giving licenses or issuing licenses to the private sector as well as foreign banks. Another important thing is foreign institutional investors or FIIs were allowed to make investment in Indian financial market. So FIIs were allowed to make investment in the financial market of the country. And examples of FII: merchant banks, mutual funds, pension funds, etc. So they were allowed to make investment in Indian financial market. Next, let us see what were the tax reforms. Tax reforms after the liberalization. The taxation and the public expenditure is together known as the fiscal policy of the government. So fiscal policy of a government means the expenditure of the government or the public expenditure plus taxation. So expenditure plus taxation will give you fiscal policy. As you know, taxes are of two types. One is direct taxes and another one is indirect taxes. So now first let us see what was the impact on direct taxes. So direct taxes are collected directly from the income of individuals plus profit of firms. So profit and income, they are taxable under the direct taxes. When we discussed the background of this crisis, we said that the revenue of the government was less. So one reason we said was insufficient tax revenues. So let us see what was the reason. We already said that the tax rates were high. Tax rates were high and this motivated people to evade taxes. Since the tax rates were high, people were not willing to pay taxes to the government and this reduced the tax revenues of the government. This was a condition before the liberalization. So after the liberalization, what the government did was, government reduced this tax rates. So tax rates were reduced and this resulted in less number of tax evasions. So when tax rates are reduced, tax evasions also reduced. And what is the impact of reduce in tax evasions? Let us see. One thing, voluntary disclosure of taxes or income. So tax payments increased. Therefore, the revenue of the government also increased. So revenue of the government increased. When revenue of the government increases with that of expenditure, what would happen? Deficit will reduce. So deficit reducing means borrowings of the government will come down. So borrowings came down. This was one impact. Another impact was increase in savings. So there was increase in savings with the financial institutions. So if you are not paying taxes, can you save your money in banks? No. You have to disclose your income if you want to save the money in banks. So when there is more tax evasion, savings will be less. So when tax payments increases, what will happen? People are willing to save their money in banks. So reduced rates of taxation had multiple effects. One, purchasing power of the people or personal disposable income. We have already seen what is personal disposable income. Personal disposable income is income minus tax payments. So when people have more personal disposable income, their purchasing power increases. So with reduced rates of taxation, the personal disposable income of people or households increased. So when personal disposable income increases, they will have more money to save. Their savings will increase. Also, if they have to pay taxes, they have to show their income. So in that scenario, they are willing to save their money in financial institutions. So this led to increased savings in the economy. And what is the impact of increased savings in the economy? An increase in savings will lead to increase in investments. So an increased savings means increased investments in the economy. Again, the corporation tax was also gradually reduced. And coming to the indirect taxes, efforts were taken to reform the indirect tax also. Establishment of a common national market was the aim of the government. Common national market. And now we have fulfilled this aim through the GST, Goods and Services Tax. So GST or common national market will enhance simplification and also encourage better compliance. And we will discuss GST in detail in a later module. Now let us see what were the reforms made in the foreign exchange sector. Foreign exchange. After liberalization, rupee was devalued. Devaluation of rupee. So what is devaluation? We have already discussed what is devaluation, but for your understanding, I'll tell you again. Devaluation is the process by which the central bank of an economy reduces the value of that particular currency. So in case of rupee, the value is brought down. So it is not an automatic process. This is an intentional process and this is done by the central bank of an economy. In case of India, RBI does this. And devaluation is a very important topic. With devaluation, you also have revaluation. Also, there is depreciation and appreciation. All these four terms are very, very important. And this explanation will require one entire session. So, I will definitely discuss revaluation, depreciation, etc. in one module. Here you must understand the rupee was devalued by the central bank. Which means the value of rupee has come down. Let us see how. Suppose before the devaluation, $1 equal to 60 rupee. Let us suppose this was before the devaluation. So now the value of rupee has come down. So for $1 you have to pay now 66 rupee. That means the value has come down. You have to pay more rupee in terms of dollar. So this is devaluation. And what will be the impact of devaluation? Devaluation will help in more inflow of foreign capital. So this will help in the inflow of foreign capital into the country. Now let us see what were the reforms made in trade and investment. Trade and investment. We have seen that with the liberalization of the economy, more foreign companies came into India or more foreign competition came. In terms of trade, there were increased competition in the market. So, competition was high in the market. Why was this competition high? This was because of foreign investment. And foreign investment means not only capital but also technology. So this led to adoption of modern technologies in the economy, more capital in the economy. So our local industries were also compelled to adopt modern technologies, and this led to improved competitiveness in the market, which led to increased output. We have also said that licensing was abolished. Import licensing was also taken away. So more imports came into Indian economy, which means that we had surplus of commodities in the market. So imports increased. So there was more supply in the market, supply more than the demand, which led to decrease in prices in the market. Inflation reduced. When supply is more than the demand, what will happen? Price will come down. Also tariffs were reduced. Tariffs were reduced, which means that there is now lesser restriction on the quantity of commodities coming to the Indian market. So this also increased in large competition, and also the supply in the market became huge, so that the price were under control and there was controlled inflation in the economy. Again, export duties were reduced. Export duties, that means Indian exporters had a fair chance of exporting to other countries. This increased the competitive position of Indian goods in the foreign market. So exports were also easy, export duties were less. And coming to the investment, what happened? Foreign investment flow into the country. Foreign investment. As a result, we had capital, we had technology. Also, there was improvement in the infrastructure of the country. So all this led to the growth and development of the country.